These are 6 players that will win you fantasy football leagues this year. The first is Garrett Wilson, which I know feels obvious, but let me explain to you why he should be one of your first receivers off the board. Last year as a rookie, he had 1,100 yards with Mike White and Zach Wilson. That alone is a feat that I didn't think anybody could accomplish. Obviously now he has Aaron Rodgers, which is a huge upgrade, and Rodgers himself even said that Garrett Wilson reminds him of another 17 he used to play with in his career, obviously alluding to Davante Adams in Green Bay. But it makes sense when you look at their traits. They're both outside dominant wide receivers that are elite route runners, have great releases off the line of scrimmage, and have soft, big hands. The only difference between Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson in terms of pure skill set is Davante Adams isn't nearly as athletic. Garrett Wilson is faster and stronger. I think a reasonable projection for Garrett Wilson this season is somewhere in the ballpark of 100 receptions for 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns. When you're an elite talent and the #1 option for an Aaron Rodgers offense, you're gonna pop off. The second guy who's gonna win fantasy football leagues this year is Bijan Robinson. There isn't another team he could have fell to that would have been a better situation. He ended up on a team that took him 8th overall that has a top 5 offensive line. I don't think people quite comprehend how insane that is, because even last year, guys like Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker didn't even go until the 2nd round. And obviously those running backs were great prospects and immediately translated into the NFL. Bijan even came out in an interview and said that Arthur Smith is gonna use him out wide and in the slot, so that's huge for his fantasy football production. And I think a lot of NFL fans and fantasy football managers are concerned that he's gonna be in a committee backfield, but even if he is, it doesn't really matter. This Falcons team ran the ball 36 times with Desmond Ridder behind center last year. That was by far the most in the NFL. And let's say Bijan Robinson gets 60 to 75% of those touches, he's still gonna be in for a huge workload. When you're getting 60 to 75% of the touches in an offense that runs the ball that much, it's basically like being a workhorse on an offense that doesn't run as much. He very well might get 20 carries a game. And obviously since he's going at the 109 as the RB4 in fantasy football, there isn't a lot of value to be made at that pick. But in my opinion, he's gonna outproduce guys like Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, pretty much everybody outside of CMC. So if you can get him at the late 1st round and pair him with an elite receiver or a guy like Travis Kelce in the early 2nd, you win that every single time. The third guy is Derrick Henry. Outside of being the best producer at the running back position over the last 5 years, there is 2 main reasons you need to draft him. Week 15 and week 17. In those weeks, he plays the Houston Texans. And we all know over the last 5 games he's played the Houston Texans, he's averaging over 200 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Basically, that means as long as Derrick Henry is healthy on your roster for week 15 and week 17, you're almost guaranteed a win. And if he can make it all the way to the end of the season here, you're almost guaranteed a championship if the rest of your team is even decent. But the cherry on top for Derrick Henry is the fact that they drafted Peter Skoronski. Instead of going out and getting a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba or a Quentin Johnson or a Jordan Addison or even a tight end like Michael Mayer or Dalton Kincaid. And they didn't really add anybody in free agency either, so they're committing to the run in this team. The only receiver they have on this offense is Treylon Burks, who obviously is extremely mid. Derrick Henry could see 35 carries a game. The fourth guy is Calvin Ridley. I'm not sure why Calvin Ridley's expectations aren't sky high this season, and unless you subscribe to the idea that him gambling on football games made him a worse football player, you should be taking him in every single fantasy football draft. The last time we saw him play in that Atlanta Falcons offense, he was a top 5 wide receiver with a 35-year-old Matt Ryan. He was also splitting targets with Julio Jones at the end of his prime. Now he's in an offense with Trevor Lawrence entering his prime, and he has nobody competing with him for targets. And I don't personally consider Christian Kirk in the slot as a real target competition. And where Calvin Ridley's going in drafts, this isn't a huge risk for your fantasy football team. He's going as the wide receiver 23 in round 5. This will probably be your 3rd receiver you take off the board. And I'm willing to bet any amount of money that he's going to finish as a top 30 receiver at minimum. So you're at least going to make back your investment. The 5th guy is Jerry Jeudy. He's the thumbnail of this video. He's why you clicked. He's currently going as the wide receiver 24 in the early 6th round. Same thing with Calvin Ridley here. There's no way he doesn't outperform his ADP at least, especially when you consider that over the last 5 weeks of the season, he was the wide receiver 3 in fantasy football. In that time span, he was averaging almost 100 yards per game and 6 receptions, and he averaged 19 fantasy points a game. If we take it back a whole calendar year and look at the top 3 receivers for the final 5 weeks of the season, these are the guys you get. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams. If you go back one more season, you'll get Calvin Ridley, Davante Adams, and Stephon Diggs. And obviously, Calvin Ridley didn't repeat that performance because of gambling. And unless you think Jerry Jeudy's throwing 3-leg parlays on FanDuel right now, I think we're going to be fine. So historically, these guys who finish top 3 over the final 5 weeks always perform extremely well the following year. And let's not forget that they have an offensive mastermind at head coach now in Sean Payton. Before we get to this last guy who's going to help you win your fantasy football football leagues, make sure you're subscribed. I just started posting longer videos like this. Obviously, you guys have seen my shorts, so please let me know in the comments what you think of these videos, how I can make them better, and what your favorite part of this video even was. But the final guy who's gonna help you win fantasy football leagues is Quentin Johnston. The fact that he's going in double-digit rounds right now as a guy who's an elite talent is crazy to me. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams both haven't stayed healthy for 2 seasons now. The chances that both of them just stay healthy for a full season despite getting older is almost 0. And Quentin Johnston is the only guy on this Chargers team that can even stretch the field. And that's what they want to do with Justin Herbert. His arm is too big to throw these 5-yard dump-offs every single play. And let's not forget, this guy's extremely talented and athletic. He had one of the best broad jumps in the entire combine, and he had a 40-inch vertical, and he's already 6'3". I'm not sure if he'll have an immediate impact on this offense, but I'm very confident in the second half of the season he's going to be a huge player for them. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like. And if you want to draft these guys for yourself in best ball drafts, go to Underdog Fantasy, put in code FFAZ, and they'll double your first deposit.